Hi everyone! This is the fourth video and the second chapter of the book I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist by Norman Geisler and Frank Turek. This video does not require you to see the other videos in advance. If there's anything that's mentioned here that was mentioned in the previous videos, I'll go ahead and make a note of that. Just like the other videos, there's nothing going on screen, so feel free to turn this on and just have it going in the background while you do your errands, drive, etc. There's nothing special to see here. Let's go ahead and get started with Chapter 2, Why Should Anyone Believe Anything at All? So for those of you that have seen the other videos, you perhaps have cringed as I was reading that title, but for those that haven't watched the other videos, this is something that the authors think that atheists think. And by atheists, they also mean the wider group of Christians that don't believe exactly the way they do. They also believe it's anyone with a college education or others people that have gone to some kind of political affiliation or something along those lines. So these are people that they think have gone to secular colleges and therefore they're atheists. They don't follow Christianity the same way they do, so therefore they're atheist. And this was actually mentioned in the previous chapter. They did describe someone as a non-Christian who goes to church. So that was a bit bizarre. So this idea that they think we believe is that there's no truth, all truth is relative, subjective, and that anything can be true, so therefore nothing's true, so why should we believe anything at all? So that's just the chapter title. We have a quote here from Blaise Pascal saying, "People almost invariably arrive at their beliefs not on the basis of proof, but on the basis of what they find attractive." And that's a great and interesting topic that we could talk about, but the way the authors are going to talk about this is the idea that they also have proposed in the previous chapter and in also the introduction, that atheists do not reject Christianity based off of any evidence type of belief or lack of evidence or logic. They don't want to follow Christianity because they don't want to be held morally accountable, which of course is a bit silly because just because I'm not held accountable by your standards doesn't mean I'm not held accountable by other standards, right? I'm still held accountable at work. I'm held accountable to my friends and family. I'm held accountable to the society. So it's a bit odd of a belief, but that is what they believe. They've stated that expressly. Author and speaker James Sire conducts an eye-opening interactive seminar for students at colleges and universities around the country. The seminar is called Why Should Anyone Believe Anything at All? With such an intriguing title, the event usually attracts a large audience. Sire believes by asking those in attendance this question: why do people believe what they believe? Despite the wide variety of answers, Sire shows that each answer he gets fits into one of four categories: sociological, psychological, religious, and philosophical. Now it does give a reference here. There's a little, it's just a sub or a superscript 1. Let's see if this goes anywhere, what this is referring to. So it turns out that they're referring to a book by James Sire, also titled Why Should Anyone Believe Anything at All? Which I guess that's the same as the chapter. So now I was able to find this book. I normally don't do this, but I was just curious because I wanted to know how they differentiated philosophical and religious for the purpose of these categories. So it recommended going to, it cited page 93 to page 101, but reading through this, you know, granted I didn't sit here and go through it with a fine-tooth comb, but I only see things where they're talking about why we should accept the Gospels as fact. So it's things like where people argue that we don't have the original manuscripts of the New Testament. In the process of copying, many errors were introduced. Argument 2, translators have introduced errors into the Bible. Besides, there are so many translations, how does anyone know which one to rely on? And so on. So that is really what this section is talking about Jesus being the reason for Christianity, evaluating the truth claims of the Christian faith, saying that our belief should be based on the best evidence, be validly argued, refute the strongest objections. There's nothing else here at all that I'm finding that would give a reason to have this section be cited by what the authors are saying. So I'm not sure where this comes from. Anyway, some of the sociological reasons, this is in table 2.1, sociological reasons: parents, friends, society, culture. Psychological reasons: comfort, peace of mind, meaning, purpose, hope, identity. Religious reasons: scripture, pastor or priest, guru, rabbi, imam, and church. And philosophical reasons: consistency, coherence, completeness, best explanation of all the evidence. So again, the question is, why do people believe what they believe? And it is interesting to see that there's religious reasons that are listed. So that is interesting to me, because usually we feel like we want to say something other than, well, I believe it because I believe it, or I believe it because it gives me comfort. We want something a little bit more, I don't want to use the word substantial. I don't think that's really fair, because comfort is fair, and when you're talking to about somebody that you trust, such as your priest or imam, this is somebody that is going to give you what you believe to be solid advice because, you know, you trust this person. So, but typically we see things even like this book talking about, oh, well, we can argue Christianity so well and so clearly and with so much evidence, but, you know, these atheists won't believe it because they don't feel like believing it. So even in this book, they're trying to argue that they're able to give us more than simply comfort or peace of mind. Beginning on the left, Sire goes through the reasons in each category by asking students, is that a good reason to believe something? Oh, well, see, Ms. Lemon, if you just would have shut up for a second. If he gets the sharp students like he would at Southern Evangelical Seminary, ! That's cute. Okay, that's cute. We'd like a little sassiness here. So if he gets sharp students, the dialogue might go something like this. Sire says, I see that many of you have cited sociological factors. For example, many people have beliefs because their parents have those same beliefs. Do you think that alone is good enough reason to believe something? And the students all say, no, parents can sometimes be wrong. Sire says, okay, what about cultural influences? Do you believe, or do you think people ought to believe something just because it's accepted culturally? The students say, no, not necessarily. The Nazis had a culture that accepted the murder of all Jews. That sure didn't make it right. I like how it says students. Like they're all going to say the same thing. Maybe they are from Southern Evangelical Seminary. Sire says, good. Now, some of you mentioned psychological factors, such as comfort. Is that a good enough reason to believe something? Students say, no, we're not comfortable with that. Seriously, comfort is not a test for truth. We might be comforted by the belief that there's a God out there who really cares for us, but that doesn't necessarily mean he really exists. Likewise, a junkie might be temporarily comforted by a certain type of drug, but that drug might actually kill him. That's interesting because I have heard some people refer to religion as the dopamine ghost. So that's kind of interesting. I just read that recently. Sire says, so you're saying that truth is important because there can be consequences when you're wrong? Well, I guess that's what they're saying. Students say, yes, if somebody is wrong about a drug, they might take too much and die. Likewise, if someone is wrong about the thickness of ice, they might fall in and freeze to death. Sire says, so for pragmatic reasons, it makes sense that we should only believe the things that are true. The students say, of course. Over the long run, truth protects and error harms. Sire says, okay, so sociological and psychological reasons alone are not adequate grounds to believe something. What about religious reasons? Some mention the Bible, others mention the Quran. Still others get their beliefs from priests or gurus. Should you believe something just because some religious source or holy book says so? The students say, no, because the question arises whose scripture or whose source should we believe? After all, they teach contradictory things. Sire says, can you give me an example? Students, well, the Bible and Quran, for example, can't both be true because they contradict one another. The Bible says that Jesus died on the cross and rose 3 days later, 1 Corinthians 15, 1-8, Well, the Quran says that he existed, but he didn't die on the cross. Surah 4:157. If one's right, the other is wrong. Then again, if Jesus never existed, both of them are wrong. Sire asks, so how can we adjudicate between, say, the Bible and the Quran? Students say, we need some proofs outside the so-called scriptures to help us discover which, if either, is true. I mean, is this really... I'm sorry, guys. Okay, as a teacher, one of the things that I do notice sometimes is when a student should have just made the point themselves in a very concise way. Instead, they kind of spread out the information by putting in this really long quote. And I'm just kind of left thinking, couldn't you have said this in a easier to read way? Couldn't you have said this in a way that's a little bit more straightforward? Why did you include a quote? And usually it's because they wanted to hit some kind of page count, which is why I took away the page counts. I took away the word counts because I don't want students doing this. I want them just writing good information. So I'm not sure if there was some sort of limit for the authors, but I really don't see how this gets us any closer to understanding this concept better. They could have said this in 4 or 5 sentences. Anyway, students say, we need some proofs outside of those so-called scriptures to help us discover which, if either, is true. Sire asks, well, from which category could we derive such proofs? The students say, well, all we have left is the philosophical category. Sire says, well, how can someone's philosophy be a proof? Isn't that just someone's opinion? The students say, no, we don't mean philosophy in that sense of the word, but in the classic sense of the word, where philosophy means finding the truth through logic, evidence, and science. Wait a minute, aren't these Sire's categories? He wrote the categories. So how come he's asking them a question if he knows the answer? Like, he knows why he wrote philosophical, and all the students are on the same page with why? Oh, no, we all understood that when he said that. Like, if he defined it when he wrote it, like, okay, we can put this in the philosophical category. Oh, but excuse me, sir, isn't that same as religion? It's just somebody's opinion or belief. Oh, no, we mean this in the classical sense. Then why would he ask this question if he outlined it earlier? You see, this is where it doesn't really flow. I don't know. So Sire says, excellent. So with that definition in mind, let's ask the same question of the philosophical category. Is something worth believing if it's rational, if it's supported by evidence, and if it best explains all the data? And the students say, that certainly seems right to us. Okay, so what do we learn from this mass quote? By exposing inadequate justifications for beliefs, the way is cleared for the seeker of truth to find adequate justifications. This is what an apologist does. An apologist is someone who shows how good reason and evidence support or contradict a particular belief. That's what we're attempting to do in this book, and that's what Sire sets up in his seminar. So based off of my experience with this type of apologetics, my prediction is going to be that we are going to agree that let's go ahead and use the classical term of philosophy, and then somehow we're going to twist around the definition and just sort of insert something that might logically follow but doesn't prove to be a valid argument. So that's what we've seen before, unfortunately, and that's what I'm assuming we're going to see again. So an apologist is someone who shows how good reason and evidence support or contradict a particular belief. That's what we're attempting to do in this book, and it's what Sire sets up in his seminar. Well, I would start with asking the authors to actually talk to some atheists, because the way that they've really misrepresented atheism and even contradicted their own definition of atheism twice so far, it doesn't seem like they're really trying to show evidence to support or contradict any belief. So far, they're just showing how much they don't know about what atheists believe. Sire's Socratic approach helps students realize at least 3 things. First, any teaching, religious or otherwise, is worth trusting only if it points to the truth. Apathy about truth can be dangerous. Well, I mean, who is making this argument, though? We're trying to set up that truth is something we should care about. Well, who says I don't care about truth? So that's a bit, why are we making this argument? In fact, believing error can have deadly consequences, both temporally and, if any one of a number of religious teachings are true, eternally as well. Second, many beliefs that people hold today are not supported by evidence, but are only the subjective preferences of those holding them. As Pascal said, people almost invariably arrive at their beliefs not on the basis of proof, but on the basis of what they find attractive. Which is fine, but who is Pascal and why should we care? As Pascal said, well, I don't care what he said. What did he demonstrate, right? Did he run a bunch of tests? Did he do surveys? Even if he did surveys, do those surveys still apply today? Because it's been quite a while since Pascal's been around, and we know that because of society's changing beliefs, cultures have different ideas. Maybe this was true then, it's not true now. Maybe it's true now, but only in certain countries. So who cares if Pascal said it? If it makes sense, it makes sense. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But why do we have to quote Pascal? Why do we care? But truth is not a subjective matter of taste. It's an objective matter of fact. So for those that did not watch the previous video, I had decided to call it something like objective truth and subjective truth. They're making it sound like anyone who's not this specific type of Christian, that we think that all truth is subjective. What's true for you doesn't have to be true for me, and that we approach everything that way, which of course isn't the case. It is true that if I take a step off of a building, I'm going to fall to my death. It doesn't matter that I personally feel like I'm going to fly or hover in midair. It's that, just because I feel that way doesn't mean that it's objectively true. So the stuff that people are actually saying is that you can't ask somebody to follow your morals just because you feel like they're correct. And just because you like them, that's fine. But that doesn't mean that everybody else has to follow them as well. And actually, I did a video about Christianity and who should be judged, and I'll put a link to that in the details section. But it's basically saying that Christians should judge other Christians because they're supposed to be following the same moral code, but that we recognize other Christians or other people do not follow this Christian code, therefore we cannot judge them according to Christian beliefs. So even the Bible says that there is this subjective quality to what they're doing, which, wow, do you think that's more important to a Christian than something Pascal might have said? I think that would be more important to a Christian. Finally, in order to find truth, one must be ready to give up those subjective preferences in favor of objective facts. And the facts are best discovered through logic, evidence, and science. So I guess that's what we're using for philosophy: logic, evidence, and science. That's what I'm assuming, because we've already established that philosophy is the way that we're going to get there. While using logic, evidence, and science seems the best way to get at truth, there are still some who have an objection. That objection concerns logic, namely, whose logic should we use, Eastern or Western? Ravi Zacharias tells a humorous anecdote that will reveal the answer. I guess I was just expecting a little bit more explanation, information, findings from experiments, something like that. Instead, it's just a lot of quotes from different people or from little stories that may not have happened. So this is not really what I was expecting out of this book. So this section is titled Western Logic versus Eastern Logic. As a Christian apologist, author, and native of India, Ravi Zacharias travels the world giving evidence for the Christian faith. He has an incisive intellect and an engaging personality, which makes him a favorite on college and university campuses. Following a recent presentation on an American campus regarding the uniqueness of Christ, Ravi was assailed by one of the university's professors for not understanding Eastern logic. During a Q&A period, the professor charged, "Dr. Zacharias, your presentation about Christ, claiming and proving to be the only way to salvation, is wrong for people in India, because you're using either-or logic. In the East, we don't use either-or logic. That's Western. In the East, we use both-and logic. So salvation is not either through Christ or nothing else, but both Christ and other ways." This is one thing that I was critical of in the past videos as well. It says, in a recent presentation on an American campus, which one? When? One of the university's professors. Who? So we get all these quotes, or alleged quotes, because this is how it's set up, that the students say this and Sire says this. And we get this of something that really nobody needed to have set up this way. But for something that we should actually care about checking the veracity of this claim, we get no additional information. We even get a link in the first part to, or not a link, but a reference to part of a book that doesn't say anything that they're saying here. But if we have something where we really need to ask a question, we have no such reference. It's just take our word on it again. And as I've said in the past, these two authors have not established that we should take their word seriously because they're willing to even go against their own definition simply to paint atheists a certain way. Ravi found this very ironic because, after all, he grew up in India. Yet here was a Western-born American professor telling Ravi that he didn't understand how things really worked in India. This was so intriguing that Ravi accepted the professor's invitation to lunch in order to discuss it further. So this is an even more private conversation, right? So if you were even in attendance at this speech that Ravi was giving at an American campus, and you happen to remember one of the university's professors, then even still, you would not be privy to this private conversation. So how are we checking that this is the case? But maybe it's not important. Maybe it's just for illustrative purposes. One of the professor's colleagues joined them for lunch, and as he and Ravi ate, the professor used every napkin and placemat on the table to make his points about the two types of logic, one Western and one Eastern. There are two types of logic, the professor kept insisting. No, you don't mean that, Ravi kept replying. I absolutely do, maintained the professor. This went on for the better than 30 minutes, the professor lecturing, writing, and diagramming. He became so engrossed in making his points that he forgot to eat his meal, which was slowly congealing on his plate. Again, this is one of those things where I brought it up in a previous video that they're adding in a bunch of really unnecessary details that when you spot like a liar, this is somebody who tends to add in a bunch of unnecessary details. I do not see the reason to sprinkle this in as if it's some kind of really interesting piece of information or that it's really good storytelling or something along those lines. We can just say, okay, the professor was really into this. But that's one thing that this type of apologist and a lot of these types of Christians specifically, they have this idea that these atheists, they think they're smart, but really they're stupid. So here he's going off and ignoring even to eat his food instead of just asking the guy, hey, are you familiar with Indian philosophy or Indian types of logic? Instead of just asking an Indian guy in front of him this question, because it's the obvious, right? He's just so silly and engrossed by making his points that he even forgot to eat his meal. Upon finishing his own meal, Ravi decided to unleash the Roadrunner tactic to rebut the confused but insistent professor. This was mentioned back in chapter 1, where basically you hit them with something that is so mind-blowing that it's like pulling the rug out from under the atheist. He interrupted, Professor, I think we can resolve this debate very quickly with just one question. Looking up from his furious drawing, the professor paused and said, okay, go ahead. Ravi leaned forward, looked directly at the professor, and asked, are you saying that when I'm in India, I must use either the both and logic or nothing else? So this is you think there's no absolute truth? Are you absolutely sure that that's the truth? That's the Roadrunner tactic. So it's a gotcha kind of moment based off of these kind of mind games or word games. The professor looked blankly at Ravi, who then repeated the question with emphasis. Are you saying that when I'm in India, I must use either, Ravi paused for effect, the both and logic, or, another pause, nothing else? Well, I mean, he can say the both and logic, right? Because you have the choice. If that's what he thinks that Indian people believe and that's Indian logic, then you would have the choice to use the either or the both and. You can use them together You can use them separately. So I don't even think this is the gotcha setup. Ravi later commented to us that the next words out of the professor's mouth were worth the time listening to his incoherent ramblings. After glancing sheepishly at his colleague, the professor looked down at his congealed meal and mumbled, "The either-or does seem to emerge, doesn't it?" Well, if that was the point, right, why let him go on for 30 minutes? Why even take him out to dinner or lunch? Why even meet him for lunch? Why couldn't you have just made this gotcha roadrunner tactic moment happen in the discussion, like the public discussion? Why did he have to let this guy go running his mouth, try to embarrass him in front of his colleagues? I mean, if he wanted to embarrass him in front of his colleague, that would have been a better thing to do in this open forum where he came to speak, wouldn't it? So this just seems, it just seems too convenient, and the people are behaving so perfectly for what the Christian, this specific type of Christian, they have these stories that they tell about these atheists, you know, getting knocked on their butts about, you know, logic and reason, and that they had to admit that the Christian thinking was correct, etc. And they were sheepish, they were humbled, you know, they were furious before, they are angered, they're this, that, and the other. And this just follows right into, or just this follows exactly the same type of thing I've heard from the pulpit back when I believed this stuff. Ravi added, "Yes, even in India, we look both ways before we cross the street because it's either me or the bus, not both of us." You know, I don't even know if I want to give this any more thought than I doubt that's what the professor, if he even existed, meant. Indeed, the either-or does seem to emerge. The professor was using the either-or logic to try to prove the both-and logic, which is the same problem everyone experiences who tries to argue the first principles of logic. They wind up sawing off the very limb upon which they sit. Imagine if the professor had said, "Ravi, your math calculations are wrong in India because you're using Western math rather than Eastern math." Yeah, as if math didn't come out of that region, okay? I mean, come on. It could have had any other example, right? Or suppose he had declared, "Ravi, your physics calculations don't apply to India because you're using Western gravity rather than Eastern gravity." We would immediately see the folly of the professor's reasoning. In fact, despite what the relativists believe, again, they think that relativists are people that don't believe in objective truth at all. Despite what the relativists believe, things work in the East just like they work everywhere else. In India, just like in the United States, buses hurt when they hit you, 2 + 2 = 4, and the same gravity keeps everyone on the ground. Likewise, murder is wrong there, just as it is here. Truth is truth, no matter what country you're from. And truth is truth no matter what you believe about it. Just as the same as gravity keeps all people on the ground, whether they believe in it or not, the same logic applies to all people, whether they believe it or not. So notice I did give that gravity example about stepping off of a building. They really, I mean, if they don't really believe this, they really seem to believe that the quote-unquote relativists don't understand objective truth. So what's the point? The point is that there's only one type of logic that helps us discover truth. It's the one built into the nature of reality that we can't avoid using. Despite this, people will try to tell you that logic doesn't apply to reality. Who? Who says this? Or logic doesn't apply to God. Christians say this. Or that there are different types of logic, and so on. But as they say such things, they use the very logic that they are denying. It's like using the laws of arithmetic to prove that arithmetic can't be trusted. This is interesting because this is something that is argued against, people used to argue it against not flat earthers, young earth creationists. So they use science while they deny science. So that's kind of interesting that this is the way that they phrased it. It's important to note that we are not simply engaging in word games here. Well, tell me how you're not. The Roadrunner tactic uses the undeniable laws of logic to expose that much of what our common culture believes about truth, religion, and morality is undeniably false. Yeah, but who? This is the thing. They're not citing any, they're citing Ravi about Ravi. They're citing Sire about Sire. They're not citing any atheist, liberal, progressive, college professor, etc. about the stuff they're claiming that we're saying. Those are the people that are actually important to cite. These are the people that you're arguing against, not the people that agree with you and aren't really adding anything to your argument. Those people aren't worth citing. So I don't know why they're doing this. So in the previous one, I did bring up the idea that there are some types of Christian, like Jehovah's Witness, but that believe it's okay to lie in order to get people to believe in God. And there are two types of lies that are okay in Islam to get people to believe in Islam. I forget what they were called. One of them is outright lying, and one of them is lying by omission. So I do wonder if that's considered okay in this case. I know when I was in this type of Christianity, we didn't believe in it because we didn't believe we had to lie. After all, if I have to lie to make my point, then maybe my point isn't worth making. So this idea that they're openly... Are they lying about it, or do they just really not know? I can't imagine they really don't know. Maybe in 2004 when this book was written, maybe they really didn't know. But definitely today when Turek, he's on, for example, Twitter, aka X, he's there with atheists actually telling him, these things that you're saying about atheists are false, please stop saying them. And he keeps saying, no, they're correct. What would we call that? Denial? Willful ignorance? Is that any better than lying? When somebody's telling you to your face, this thing you're saying about me is not true, please stop saying it. I don't even know where you got this. Can you prove how your claim is true? And they just say, well, it's true, you know it in your heart. It says so in the Bible. What is that? Is that better than a lie? I mean, what do you think? Do you think that's better than a lie? And then better in which way? Like, is it more moral? Is it more honest? That which is self-defeating cannot be true, but many Americans believe it anyway. Who? Where? We contradict ourselves at our own peril. This section is called To Be Burned or Not to Be Burned? That is the question. The Roadrunner tactic is so effective because it utilizes the law of non-contradiction. So again, this is assuming that the atheist that you're speaking to is going to use exactly the phrasing that you're expecting. They're talking about, well, there is no such thing as absolute truth. Oh, do you think that's absolutely true? Yes, haha, gotcha. That's the Roadrunner tactic. But again, nobody really says this. So what is the Christian who reads this book? What is that person to do when they read the book? They feel really good about, oh yeah, I'm going to go, win people for Jesus. I got this book as sort of a manual, and I know exactly how to deal with people like this. They even gave an example of how to interact with people by going door to door to sell them Jesus. They even gave that example in the previous chapter. How is that person going to feel when they meet their first atheist who doesn't at all give them the opportunity for the Roadrunner tactic, because nobody believes this stuff? I know for me, it really made me question what was being taught at the pulpit, and it certainly didn't lead me away from Christianity, but it did lead me away from church. So this was the idea that, why should I even listen to what these people are saying? I could just listen to the Bible. So I left church not because I thought all the other churches would be the same, but I left church because I reevaluated, why would I even want to have somebody else telling me what's in the Bible? I could just read it for myself. So I don't know what their goal is here. They might sell this book, but after they lose that Christian, that really on fire for Jesus type of Christian who goes out and puts this to use and finds that you lied or were honestly mistaken, they're not going to buy your second book. Is that okay, just because they bought your first book? The law of non-contradiction is a self-evident first principle of thought that says contradictory claims cannot both be true at the same time in the same sense. In short, it says that the opposite of true is false. We all know this law intuitively, and we use it every day. Suppose you see a married couple on the street one day, friends of yours, and you ask the wife if it's true she's expecting a baby. If she says yes, and her husband says no, you don't say, "Thanks a lot, that really helps me." You think maybe she hasn't told him. Or maybe they misunderstood the question, or maybe something worse. There's one thing you know for sure. They can't both be right. The law of non-contradiction makes that self-evident to you. Okay, fine, but how does this help the Christian deal with the atheist like me who just says, I don't see any evidence that your God exists? There's no contradiction there. When investigating any question of fact, including the question of God, the same law of non-contradiction applies. Either the theists are right and God exists, or the atheists are right and God doesn't exist. Well, see, Ms. Lemon, if you just would have shut up for a second, he would have answered your concern. Both can't be correct. Likewise, either Jesus died and rose from the dead as the Bible claims, or he did not as the Quran claims. One is right and the other is wrong. In fact, a medieval Muslim philosopher by the name of, oh good, we got Avicenna, suggested a surefire way to correct someone who denies the law of non-contradiction. He said that anyone who denies the law of non-contradiction should be beaten and burned until he admits that to be beaten is not the same as to be beaten, and to be burned is not the same as to be burned. A bit extreme, but you get the point. While reasonable people have no problem with the law of non-contradiction, some very influential philosophers have denied it implicitly in their teachings. Perhaps two of the most influential are David Hume and Immanuel Kant. You know, honestly, I haven't read anything from either of those guys. Too busy reading stuff like this, Frank. Many people have never heard of Hume and Kant, but their teachings have affected the modern mind greatly. That's why it's so important we take a brief look at each one of them. We'll start with Hume. Hume's skepticism. Should we be skeptical about it? Perhaps more than any other person, David Hume is responsible for all the skepticism prevalent today. As the skepticism prevalent today. As an empiricist, Hume believed that all meaningful ideas were either true by definition or must be based on a sense of experience. Since, according to Hume, there are no sense experiences for concepts beyond the physical, any metaphysical claims, those about concepts beyond the physical, including God, should not be believed because they're meaningless. In fact, Hume asserted two propositions can be meaningful only if they meet the following two conditions. Number one, the truth claim is abstract reasoning such as a mathematical equation or a definition, such as 2 + 2 = 4, or all triangles have 3 sides. Or, the truth claim can be verified empirically through one or more of the 5 senses. While he claimed to be a skeptic, Hume certainly wasn't skeptical about those two conditions. He was absolutely convinced he had the truth. In fact, he concludes in his Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding with this emphatic assertion: if we take in our hand any volume of divinity or school of metaphysics, for example, let us ask, does it contain any abstract reasoning concerning quantity or number? No. Does it contain any experimental reasoning concerning matter of fact and existence? No. Commit it then to the flames, for it can contain nothing but sophistry and illusion. Which, I mean, is fine, but I don't think we can throw away somebody's feeling through the senses. But I think we can only say it's one of those things that's subjectively true. An example that comes to mind is one where I'm having a migraine and I feel really dizzy. It feels like somebody grabbed me on the shoulders and they're shaking me violently, like I'm in a really bad earthquake. And so I have to ask somebody around me, is there currently an earthquake or is it just something that I'm feeling? So this is not one of my 5 senses. This is another sense of yourself in 3-dimensional space. So it physically feels like I'm floating around or being shaken. It's a lot of different feelings, but visually, I'm not really seeing anything different. There's nothing touching my skin. So this is something that is not through the 5 senses, but it is an experience that I'm having. Of course, we're not having an earthquake. Does that mean that I'm not experiencing this right now? And so this would be falling under like that subjective truth, or that subjective experience. This is not something we can just throw into the fire. I'm really feeling this. And I should tell my doctor they may need to get me on a different type of medication, or this might mean something else. Maybe there's some problem that's happening and I need to get a CT scan or an MRI or something. So this isn't something to just throw away. But I don't know why we're talking about Hume. Shouldn't we be talking about what atheists currently believe? Are atheists currently believing this? Do you see the implications of Hume's 2 conditions? If he's correct, then any book talking about God is meaningless. You might as well use all religious writing for kindling. Nearly 200 years later, Hume's two conditions were converted into the principle of empirical verifiability by 20th century philosopher A.J. Ayer. The principle of empirical verifiability claims that a proposition can be meaningful only if it's true by definition or if it's empirically verifiable. Okay, but again, are we talking about people's subjective experiences? They're not throwing those away. They're just talking about what can we agree on as true. By the mid-1960s, this view had come into rage in the university philosophy departments across the country, including the University of Detroit, where I, Norm, was a student. In fact, I took an entire class on logical positivism, which is another name for the brand of philosophy espoused by Ayer. The professor of that class, a logical positivist, was a strange breed. Though he claimed to be a Catholic, he refused to believe it was meaningful to speak about the existence of reality beyond the physical, such as metaphysics or God. In other words, he was an admitted atheist. Do you see here again? So in 2 of the 3 previous videos, I mentioned that this type of Christian will actually call other types of Christians atheists. So when these types of Christians claim, I used to be an atheist until I found such compelling evidence that I became Christian, we don't know if they were actually atheist or if they were just a different kind of Christian. And oftentimes it does seem like they were just a different kind of Christian, saying things like, I was mad at God, or I fell away from the church and I didn't go as often, but they still believed in God. I also don't see how this is an admitted atheist. He's saying, I have a belief, the Catholic belief, the afterlife and stuff. I just don't see that it's useful to talk about it because I can't prove it. That's what I got out of this, right? That he's saying it's not meaningful to speak about the existence of a reality beyond the physical, probably because he can't demonstrate it to be true, so there's no point in discussing it. That might be, now I'm not saying that his belief is something I totally agree with. I'm just saying that might marry the two concepts of being a logical positivist and a Catholic. I would not say, in other words, he was an admitted atheist who told us that he wanted to convert the entire class to his brand of semantical atheism. Is that what he said? I once asked him, how can you be both Catholic and an atheist? Ignoring 2 millennia of the official Catholic teaching, he replied, you don't have to believe in God to be a Catholic, you just have to keep the rules. Okay. Notice there's no name. There's no name for the professor, by the way. There's not even a year, it's just the mid-1960s. On the first day of that class, this professor gave the class the task of giving presentations based on the chapters in Ayer's book, Logic, Truth, and Language. I volunteered to do the chapter titled, The Principle of Empirical Verifiability. Now keep in mind, this principle was the very foundation of logical positivism, and thus of the entire course. At the beginning of the next class, the professor said, Mr. Geisler, we'll hear from you first. Keep it to no more than 20 minutes so we can have ample time for discussion. Well, since I was using the lightning-fast roadrunner tactic, oh boy, let me guess, and then everybody stood up and clapped. I had absolutely no trouble with the time constraints. I stood up and simply said, the principle of empirical verifiability states that there are only 2 types of meaningful propositions, those that are true by definition and those that are empirically verifiable. Since the principle of empirical verifiability itself is neither true by definition nor empirically verifiable, it cannot be meaningful. That was it. I sat down. I mean, yeah, that's cute. That's sassy. We like that, right? But aren't they already saying that empirical verifiability is true because we said it's true? So wouldn't that be true by definition? Anyway. There was a stunned silence in the room. Most of the students could see the coyote dangling in midair. They recognized that the principle of empirical verifiability could not be meaningful based on its own standard. It self-destructed in mid-air. In just the second class period, the foundation of that entire class had been destroyed. By the way, this is all with exclamation marks. What was the professor going to talk about for the next 14 weeks? Well, I'll tell you what he was going to talk about. Instead of admitting that his class and his entire philosophical outlook was self-defeating and thus false, the professor suppressed that truth, hemmed and hawed, and went on to suspect that I was behind everything that went wrong for him the rest of the semester. His allegiance to the principle of empirical verifiability, despite its obvious fatal flaw, was clearly a matter of the will, not the mind. Why not tell us what he actually replied, though? Why? I mean, it must have been something like, well, that sounds, straightforward enough, but here's what it's actually saying, and here's how you misunderstood it. Why not that? I mean, even if it's not true, and Norm did not misunderstand this, he would have said something. He couldn't just stand there and just say, okay, class dismissed for today. He's not going to do that, right? He's going to have some kind of argument against it. This is something he totally believes. This is something he's teaching a course on at the university level. Why would this not be included? So this, again, it doesn't sound true. It doesn't sound true that somebody who not only believes something personally, but also teaches a course on this, is just not going to say anything and turn into some paranoid guy looking over his shoulder trying to find that dastardly Norm. This is so bizarre. It's bizarre. I mean, if he said something like, oh, and then he canceled the class or something, at least there's an end to this. But it's bizarre how he's phrased it, right? I mean, does this sound true? It's like if I said, well, Christian, and then I make one statement. Every Christian says, well, it's out of context. You don't understand it this way. Well, it's because of this, or I'll pray for you. Something, right? They're not just going to be stunned and go, they're not going to do that. Nobody does that. Why does he want us to believe that every atheist or college professor is just this like mouth-breathing, non-thinking moron? I mean, I don't know. I don't even know why they want that to be true. I really don't. I mean, I can tell you why I wanted it to be true when I was Christian, because that's how I felt they looked at me, that I was stupid and that I didn't have anything of value to say and that I was uneducated. And in fact, we kind of see that in some of the comments that were left on the previous videos. People saying stuff like, I can't think, that's why I'm religious, or they should have changed the book to the book title to something like, I'm not smart enough to be an atheist. And under those, I did comment that's something that I was hurt by when I was Christian. I was educated. I started college when I was 16. I was getting scholarships and stuff. This idea that I wasn't educated enough to be atheist just wasn't true. And there's plenty of educated Christians. But the idea here is that for some reason, there's a piece, like in my brain, there was this file cabinet of all the stuff that I knew as a Christian. And I could not open and investigate it. I could open and investigate all the other topics, all the files in the other topics that I knew or that I learned about, that I wanted to know more about. I could open them up, check them out, read them, throw them out. If I saw that they were inaccurate or I had to update my understanding, I could throw away the old information. But in that filing cabinet of Christianity, I couldn't touch it. I could not investigate it. So it had nothing to do with being educated. It had to do with this idea that everything else can follow with science, but Christianity cannot be tested against science, because you shall not test the Lord thy God. God works in mysterious ways. We have to have faith, not works. We have to have faith, not evidence, right? So this idea was, I can't investigate Christianity because it's so wildly different from everything else that it just can't be looked at in the same way. It was only after I got that boost from my church where I could go and talk to atheists and just get them with these roadrunner tactics and these gotcha moments. It was only at that point where I was having those files investigated. I wasn't investigating them, but I was opening myself to this, and these atheists were opening those files for me and saying, take a look at this, how do you resolve this? And at first my faith was really strong, but after you really start thinking about it and this gets stuck in your brain and you're kind of mulling it over, you start to wonder, yeah, how does that work? How is this supposed to follow? How can God be not jealous and also jealous? How does that make sense? So it's, that's the kind of thing that I wanted to be true about Christians or atheists at the time. And I feel like this is maybe the same thing that these authors are thinking, or it might just be me, projecting. But I really don't know why they're trying to present atheists as these bumbling idiots who don't even know what they believe. This is the second time we've seen it in as many chapters. In the first chapter, we got one guy going from atheist to agnostic because they decided to define it slightly differently. And then they're like, yes, we did it. We got him to go from atheist to agnostic. Haha, we did it. No, you just define, like, you're not listening to the guy. You're just putting words in his mouth. And that's if there ever was a guy. There's a lot more to Hume, particularly his anti-miracle arguments, which we'll address when we get to chapter 8. But for now, the point is this. Hume's hard empiricism, and that of his devotee A.J. Ayer, is self-defeating. The claim that something can only be meaningful if it's empirically verifiable or true by definition excludes itself because that statement is neither empirically verifiable nor true by definition. Which, I mean, that's fine, but this is not like the be-all of atheism, right? I mean, again, okay, so what? In other words, Hume and Ayer tried to prove too much because their method of discovering meaningful propositions excludes too much. Certainly, claims that are empirically verifiable or true by definition are meaningful. However, such claims don't comprise all meaningful statements about Hume, or that Hume and Ayer contend. So instead of committing all books about God to the flames, as Hume suggests, you may want to consider using Hume's books to get your fire going. Well, I mean, why not read both and see what people believe? I don't think about throwing books of religion to the flames. In fact, I started reading some apocryphal texts, these books about biblical themes that are outside of the actual canonical Bible. I mean, I'm reading more of the Bible than the average Christian, even on my channel. Like, obviously, I don't have this feeling. So what are Norm and Frank going to say to somebody like me? Somebody like Apologia? Somebody like many of the other atheists out there? This section is titled, Kant's Agnosticism. Should we be agnostic about it? Immanuel Kant's impact has been more devastating to the Christian worldview than David Hume's. For if Kant's philosophy is right, then there is no way to know anything about the real world, even empirically verifiable things. Why? Because according to Kant, the structure of your senses and your mind forms all sense data, so you never really know the thing in itself. You only know the thing to you after your mind and senses form it. I mean, this is not, this is fine, right? I mean, how I would not phrase it that I can't know something. I can know, I would say this is more of a semantic argument. That's how I would phrase it. Because this is something that I actually recently taught my AP psychology students. We're learning about how senses and perception interact, about transduction, the idea of like converting a chemical signal such as taste into an electrical signal that your brain can understand and interpret the flavor thereof. So yeah, I don't think this is necessarily anything that anybody should argue about. But then what else is being added here that we don't really know it in itself? I'm not sure if I'm 100% on board with that. We'll see what the authors have to say. I mean, it's one of those things where you kind of end up with a so what. If we are brains in a vat, if we are just a program, okay, so what? It's still me. I'm still thinking. I'm still thinking I'm thinking. I'm still experiencing what I think I'm experiencing. The end. I'm still having the experience, right? Even if the experience is something that is being generated for me in some kind of way, again, the brain in the vat, or if I'm not even real, I just think that I'm real, I still think I'm having real experiences. So it's fun to think about, but functionally, it doesn't change anything. I'm still going to wake up tomorrow at the same time that I do on the weekend or weekdays to go to work and do the same job. It doesn't really change much functionally. So whether I can know something for sure or I can only know something based off of my sense perception, so what? To get a handle on this, look for a second out the window at a tree. Guys, we're being told to look at the trees. Kant is saying that the tree you think you're looking at appears the way it does because your mind is forming the sense data that you're getting from the tree. You don't really know the tree in itself. You only know the phenomena that your mind categorizes about the tree. In short, you can't know if the tree is real in itself only as the tree appears to you. Okay, that's cute. But again, so what? Phew, why is it that the average person on the street doesn't doubt what he sees with his own two eyes, but supposedly brilliant philosophers do? The more we study philosophy, the more we're convinced of this. If you want to make the obvious seem obscure, just let philosophers get a hold of it. I mean, isn't that what we're doing here with this book? But again, this is something that I had to tell my students. It's not complicated. It just sounds complicated because you've never thought about it. You've never questioned how you see. You've never questioned why you taste what you taste. You've never questioned that process. The process itself, it's not simple, but it's simple to explain. To me, that's really what philosophers do, is they think about the stuff that we don't really think about. I thought that was kind of the point. Everything that we sort of take for granted, that's what they're calling into question. And that's great, right? Why are we making fun of that, you know? Nevertheless, we can't avoid studying philosophy because, as C.S. Lewis said, good philosophy must exist, if for no other reason, because bad philosophy needs to be answered. Kant's philosophy is bad philosophy, yet it has convinced many people that there is an unbridgeable gulf between them and the real world, and there's no way that you can get any reliable knowledge about the world, what the world is really like, much less what God is really like. According to Kant, we are locked into complete agnosticism about the world. Now, I haven't read Kant, but that's not at all what I got from this. I just got that all we know about the tree is how our brains perceive it, the end. Which, again, how do you argue with that? That's really all you know, is how you visually perceive it, right? I don't know if this is something that I'm okay with because of my migraines, and I hate having to bring up my migraines constantly, but honestly, they're a really good argument against some of this stuff, or for some of this stuff, that there are times when things are visibly changed, and anyone who gets migraines with auras or some visual disturbance, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. On rare occasions, I'll get pieces of my visual field will be blacked out. Just these erratic chunks of my field of vision just are black. One time they were black, but outlined in this like blue looking static. This is not really happening, and I know that. But what sucks is that this is what I see. It's going to affect how I behave because this is what I see. If I'm driving and this happens, I have to pull over and wait until it goes away, for example, right? I ended up having to ask my students, I was trying to show them a picture, and then I just had that weird vision happen where it was that pieces missing plus that electric blue static around it. And I could not click on the picture, so I had to ask them to help me with it. That's it. Now, for them, they didn't see any change, but for me, I did. So for them, this was a bit weird that their teacher was asking them, hey, is my mouse touching this particular picture? But for me, that was the only way I could navigate the situation. So the authors seem really bothered by this, but maybe that's why I'm not bothered by it, because I see things and hear things that aren't there pretty regularly, and I still have to navigate the world despite that. Thankfully, there's a simple answer to all of this: the road runner tactic. Blessed be. Kant commits the same error as Hume. He violates the law of non-contradiction. He contradicts his own premise by saying that no one can know the real world while claiming he claims to know something about it, namely that the real world is unknowable. In effect, Kant says the truth about the real world is that there are no truths about the real world. So again, great, it's wordplay, but you're not really discussing what he wants to discuss. You're just discussing this wordplay. So who cares? Either way, these are not things that I've really known any atheist to actually say, so I don't know who he's arguing against. Okay, so good job, you argued against Hume and Kant. What about the atheists today? Since these self-defeating statements can stump even the sharpest minds, let's look at Kant's error another way. Kant is also making the logical fallacy called the nothing but fallacy. This is a fallacy because nothing but statements imply more than knowledge. Kant says that he knows the data that gets to his brain is nothing but phenomena, but in order to know this, he would have to be able to see more than just the phenomena. Well, this is the same argument that we make against people who are Christian or Muslim, etc. This idea that you can't know God, that God works in mysterious ways, but let me tell you exactly what I know about God. Let me tell you exactly what God wants. Let me tell you how I know that God is going to do this thing. My favorite is when Christians say they know that the end of the world is coming, and I say, well, nobody knows when it's coming, not the Son, but only the Father. So you're telling me that you have this feeling? This was something I argued as a Christian to my youth pastor, because he was saying that he knows that the end of the world is going to come in my generation. And I just said, how could you possibly say that? Not even the Son knows, only the Father. So it's really a bizarre thing that is argued by a lot of Christians and Muslims. Things like the first cause argument, that everything has to have a cause, well, except God. So this seems like he's arguing, or both of the authors are arguing against the special pleading, which it seems like what it is. Maybe they see it as a different thing. Let's find out. In other words, in order to differentiate one thing from another thing, you have to be able to perceive where one ends and the other begins. For example, if you put a white piece of paper on a black desk, the only way you can tell where the paper ends is by seeing some part of the desk that borders it. The contrast between the paper and the desk allows you to see the boundaries of the paper. Likewise, in order for Kant to differentiate the thing in the real world from that which his mind perceives, he would have to have been able to see both. But this is exactly what he says can't be done. He says the phenomena of the mind can be known, not the noumena, his term for the real world. If there's no way to distinguish between the phenomena and the noumena, then you really can't see how they might differ. And if you can't see how they might differ, then it makes much more sense to assume that they are the same. In other words, that the idea in your mind accurately represents the thing in the real world. Wasn't that what I was saying? That realistically, this doesn't actually impact how I live. So they're asking us, even if you want to try to distinguish this with fancy terms, we all know what's really going on and we can all operate with what's really being said. Isn't that what I was critical of them for as well? What we are saying is that you really do know the thing itself. You really do know the tree you are seeing because it is being impressed upon your mind through your senses. In other words, Kant was wrong. Your mind doesn't mold the tree molds your mind. I don't think, that's not what I got out of it, that the mind molded the tree, or the tree molded the mind. Just think about a wax seal. It's not the wax that impresses the seal, it's the seal that impresses the wax. I didn't get that. Did you guys get that? I didn't see that that's what he was saying. There's no gulf between your mind and the real world. Migraines have entered the chat. In fact, your senses are your windows to the world, right? And your senses have to accurately represent what's out there. And senses, like windows, are that through which we look at the outside world, right? Or sometimes what's going on in our mind affects how we perceive the outside world. So how do we know which is true? How do I know that suddenly the world, the visual reality around me isn't full of these black potholes? How do I know that it's in my head? How do I really know that we're not having an earthquake and that this is some sense that's created in my mind? How do I know that? So this is really bizarre, because these examples I gave already they explain against what they're saying here. And senses, like windows, are that through which we look at the outside world. They are not that at which we are looking. In philosophy class Norm, was teaching, I pointed out the flaws in Kant's philosophy this way. I said, first, if Kant claims that he can't know anything about the real world, the thing itself, then how does he know the real world is there? And second, his view is self-defeating because he claims you can't know anything about the real world while asserting that he knows that the real world is unknowable. This kind of reminds me about when some Christians say that they can't that we can't test God because we can't see, hear, feel, taste, or touch him, but that they know he's real because they can feel him, they can sense him. But we don't know that God's real through our senses, but we can sense that he's real. One student blurted out, "No, it can't be that easy, Dr. Geisler. You can't destroy the central tenet of the last 100 years of philosophical thought in just a couple simple sentences." Quoting my favorite source, the Reader's Digest, I responded, "That's what happens when a beautiful theory meets a brutal gang of facts. Besides, whoever said that a refutation has to be complex? If someone makes a simple mistake, it only takes a simple correction to point it out. There's nothing complex about the Roadrunner. He's simply fast and effective." Yeah, but is he encompassing that which we are actually discussing? Hume and Kant are wrong. So what? Well, good. At least they addressed that question. Since Hume and Kant violate the law of non-contradiction, their attempts to destroy all religious truths fail. However, just because Hume and Kant are wrong, that doesn't necessarily mean that we have positive evidence for, say, the existence of God. I'm glad they brought this up because so far, I haven't seen us get any closer to God, and I also haven't seen us get any closer to the idea that atheists have faith. So it just seems to be a lot of writing for the sake of writing. The Roadrunner tactic can only reveal that a proposition is false. It does not provide positive evidence that any particular claim is true. So is it true that a theistic God exists? Is there any knowable evidence that will give us any reasonable certainty one way or the other? Is there such a thing as knowable evidence for an unseen God? That's a good question. See, I just brought it up. To answer those questions, we need to investigate how truth itself can be known. This is where, in the introduction, I got really excited because it seemed like they did understand what atheists are actually asking. But if that's the case, then why is this book just this so far? How is truth known? Let's sum up what we've seen so far. Truth exists, and it is absolute and undeniable. To say truth cannot be known is self-defeating because the very statement claims to be a known absolute truth. In fact, anytime we say anything, we are implying that we know at least some truth, because any position on any subject implies some degree of knowledge. If you say that someone's position is wrong, you must know what is right in order to say that. You can't know what is wrong unless you know what is right. Even if you say, "I don't know," you are admitting that you know something. Namely, you know that you don't know something about the topic in question, not that you don't know anything at all. Who's claiming they don't know anything at all? This is another one of those, they're just playing with the words. Of course that's what they mean, that we know something. We're saying we don't know something about the topic in question. Who believes that when an atheist says, "I'm not sure," that they think they're not sure about everything? You know, that's bizarre. Why would you even say that? But just how does one know truth? In other words, by what process do we discover truths about the world? The process of discovering truth begins with the self-evident laws of logic called first principles. They are called first principles because there's nothing behind them. They are not proved by other principles, they are simply inherent in the nature of reality and are thus self-evident. So you don't need to learn these first principles, you just know them. Everyone intuitively knows these principles, even if they haven't thought about them explicitly. Two of these principles are the law of non-contradiction and the law of the excluded middle. We've already seen the reality value of the law of non-contradiction. The law of the excluded middle tells us that something either is or is not. For example, either God exists or he does not. What if he used to exist? Either Jesus rose from the dead or he did not. What if he did, then he died again? There are no third alternatives. I don't know, those seem like third alternatives. These first principles are the tools that we use to discover all other truths. In fact, without them you couldn't learn anything else. First principles are to learning what your eyes are to seeing. Just as your eyes must be built into your body for you to see anything, first principles must be built into your mind for you to learn anything. It is from these first principles that we can learn about reality and ultimately discover the box top to this puzzle we call life. And this reference goes to the introduction where they're talking about the box top for a puzzle box that has the picture of what is supposed to be completed, like the complete picture of the puzzle. So that we all have these puzzle pieces, we're trying to figure out life, but we don't actually know what the box top picture is supposed to look like. That's what they're talking about. Although we use these first principles to help us discover truth, They alone cannot tell us whether or not a particular proposition is true. To see what I mean, consider the following logical argument. Number 1, all men are mortal. Number 2, Spencer is a man. Number 3, therefore Spencer is mortal. The self-evident laws of logic tell us that the conclusion, Spencer is mortal, is a valid conclusion. In other words, the conclusion follows necessarily from the premises. If all men are mortal and if Spencer is a man, then Spencer is mortal. However, the laws of logic do not tell us whether those premises, and thus the conclusion, is true. Maybe all men are not mortal. Maybe Spencer is not a man. Logic by itself can't tell us one way or the other. Good, I'm glad they brought that up. This point is more easily seen by looking at a valid argument that isn't true. Consider the following. Number 1, all men are four-legged reptiles. Number 2, Zachary is a man. Number 3, therefore Zachary is a four-legged reptile. Logically, this argument is valid, but we all know that it isn't true. The argument is valid because the conclusions follow from the premises, but the conclusion is false because the first premise is false. This makes me realize I misspoke earlier in the video. In other words, an argument can be logically sound but still false because the premises of the argument do not correspond to reality. So logic only gets us so far. Okay, great. We agree. I don't know why we've been focusing on logic and philosophy. We can just go with evidence. Logic can tell us an argument is false, but it cannot tell us by itself which premises are true. How do we know that Zachary is a man? How do we know that men are not four-legged reptiles? We need some more information to discover those truths. We get that information from observing the world around us and then drawing general conclusions from those observations. When you observe something over and over again, you may conclude that some general principle is true. For example, when you repeatedly drop an object off the table, you naturally observe that the object always falls to the floor. If you do that enough, you finally realize there must be some general principle in place known as gravity. This method of drawing general conclusions from specific observations is called induction, which is commonly equated with the scientific method. In order to be clear, we need to distinguish induction from deduction. The process of lining up premises in an argument and arriving at a valid conclusion is called deduction. That's what we did in the arguments above. But the process of discovering whether the premises in an argument are true usually requires induction. Much of what you know by induction. In fact, you've already used induction intuitively to investigate the truths of the premises in the arguments above. Namely, you determined that since every man you have observed has been a two-legged mammal, the man Zachary cannot be a four-legged reptile. You did the same thing with the question of Spencer's mortality. Since all men you've heard about ultimately die, you made the general conclusion that all men are mortal, including the specific individual man named Spencer. These conclusions, two-legged men, gravity, and human mortality, are all inductive conclusions. Most conclusions based on induction cannot be considered absolutely certain, but only highly probable. For example, are you absolutely 100% certain that gravity makes all objects drop? No, because you haven't observed all objects being dropped. Likewise, are you absolutely certain that all men are mortal? No, because you haven't observed all men die. Perhaps there's someone somewhere who hasn't died, or will not die in the future. So if inductive conclusions are not certain, can they be trusted? Yes, but to varying degrees of certainty. As we've said before, since no human being possesses infinite knowledge, most of our inductive conclusions can be wrong. There is one important exception. It's called the perfect induction, where all the particulars are known. For example, all the letters on this page are black. This is perfect induction because it yields certainty about the conclusion because you can observe and verify that every letter is indeed black. But even when we don't have complete or perfect information, we often have enough information to make reasonably certain conclusions on most questions in life. For example, since virtually everyone has been observed to die, your conclusion that all men are mortal is considered true beyond a reasonable doubt. It's 99+% sure, but it's not beyond any doubt. It takes some faith, albeit a small amount, to believe it. There we go. There's the word game. It takes faith, right? It takes faith to believe it. Not, well, I'll believe it until I see otherwise. It just takes faith, right? The same can be said for concluding that gravity affects all objects, not just some. The conclusion is practically certain, but not absolutely certain. In other words, we can be sure beyond a reasonable doubt, but not beyond all doubt. The next section is, how are truths about God known? So what does observation and induction have to do with discovering the existence of God? Everything. In fact, observation and induction help us investigate the ultimate religious question, does God exist? All right, guys, finally. We've made it this far. Finally, we've done it. You say, wait a minute. How can we use observation to investigate an unobservable being called God? After all, if God is invisible and immaterial as most Christians, Jews, and Muslims claim, then how can our senses help us gather information about him? Actually, I wasn't thinking that. I mean, that's a fair point, but I was just open to whatever you guys had to say, so let's find out. The answer: we use induction to investigate God the same way we use it to investigate other things we can't see, by observing their effects. For example, we can't observe gravity directly. We can only observe its effects. Likewise, we can't observe the human mind directly, but only its effects. From those effects, we can make rational inference to the existence of a cause. However, I will say we can make predictions. We can also make mathematical expressions to show how gravity behaves or what to expect from gravity in certain cases, right? We can, like, for example, how the idea of gravitational lensing, this was proposed mathematically, and then we found it to be true. What can we do with God? We can also make certain tests with different parts, for example, of your personality or temperament. And we can see, using brain scans, when asked a certain question and giving a certain response, different parts of the brain will light up. So in this way, we can still test it. We can see the effects and we can test it. We can make predictions. We can also make mathematical models. So hopefully they're going to show us the exact same thing, because they're saying the human mind, gravity, and God all can be observed, or ideas about them can be observed in the same way. So let's see what we got. In fact, the book you are now reading is a case in point. Why do you assume that this book is an effect of a human mind? Because all your observational experience tells you that a book is an effect that results only from some pre-existing intelligence, such as an author. You've never seen the wind, the rain, or other natural forces produce a book. You've only seen people do so. So despite the fact that you didn't see anyone writing this book, you've concluded that it must have at least one author. Are we going to jump somehow to the universe having an author? By reasoning that this book has an author, you are naturally putting observation, induction, and deduction together. If we were to write out your thoughts in a logical form, they would look like this deductive argument. Number 1. All books have at least one author, premise based on inductive investigation. Number 2. I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist is a book, premise based on observation. Number 3. Therefore, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist has at least one author. Conclusion. Okay, so let's do it with God. Let's see. Let's do it with God. Come on, guys. You know the argument is valid because of deduction, and you know the argument is true because the premises are true, which you have verified through observation and induction. Now here's the big question. Just as a book requires pre-existing human intelligence, are there any observable effects that seem to require some kind of pre-existing supernatural intelligence? Whoa! I've observed, or appear to have observed, or however the authors want to phrase it, I've observed human intelligence. I don't even know what supernatural intelligence would be, let alone observed it. So I don't know where we're jumping to this. We've already jumped to a concept. They better define it. They had better define this. In other words, are there effects that we can observe that point to God? The answer is yes, and the first effect is the universe itself. You guys, you see, when these authors talk about, oh, I used to be an atheist, or authors like this, they talk about, I used to be an atheist, and they go on about arguments that no atheist has ever made. You know they weren't atheists like you and I define atheists as atheists. They're atheists like they define atheists, which are other types of Christian. But when I say I used to be a Christian just like this, and you see me consistently predicting exactly what they're going to say, well, QED, guys. Great. So the universe has an author, y'all. We figured it out, and it points to supernatural intelligence because, of course, we've observed that in the past, right? An investigation of its beginning is the next step on our journey to discover the box top. Okay, let's do it. Let's freaking do it, guys. Let's franken do it, okay? But before we look at that evidence for the beginning of the universe, we need to address one more objection to truth, and that is, so what? Who cares about truth? Who has that objection? Who says this? How about we just get into it? Like this is exactly the only thing that I wanted out of this book was, can you guys demonstrate that there is a God, and therefore it takes more faith to be an atheist? And now we're what, mostly through chapter 2, after we've read very long introduction and chapter 1 and the pre-introduction and all this other stuff. And finally we're getting to what we might be interested in actually reading. And then we go off on a tangent that nobody asked for. Ugh, again, why do they keep doing this? This is the azure spheres of reading. So what? Who cares about truth? We sometimes ask our students, what's the greatest problem in America today? Is it ignorance or is it apathy? Who asked this? I've never asked my students this. One time a student answered, I don't know and I don't care. I mean, okay, cute, but who's we? Why are we asking this? Why don't we get into what we care? I want to know what they got to say about the evidence for God, inductive, deductive, whatever. Let's get into that at least. That sums up the problem in America today. Who cares about America today? America today, the situation that America today is in, has no bearing on whether a God exists or not. And I'm getting so sick and tired of these authors focusing on Americans today and American universities in America. Who freaking cares? Who franken cares, right? I just want to see what they actually have to say about something that matters. That's all? Is that so much to ask? I mean, this book is supposed to be helping us out to get us to a reasonable understanding of God. And that we can maybe not understand something for sure, but we can understand it beyond a reasonable doubt. And instead we're talking about stuff that nobody cares about because America today and Democrats this and university professors that I don't cite that. Who cares? If you're a Christian watching this, please just actually talk to an atheist. Don't talk at them, just talk with them, okay? Many of us are ignorant and apathetic about truth. Who? But not when it comes to money, medicine, or other tangible items we mentioned earlier. We care passionately about those things. But many people are ignorant and apathetic about truth and morality and religion. We know you're not because you're taking the time to read this book. Yeah, and you haven't given us anything to care about. So that's apathy. And you haven't been accurate about representing what atheists believe, so that's ignorant. So yeah, thanks a lot. Are the people who have adopted the whatever theme of the culture right? Or does truth and morality and religion really matter? It really matters. How do we know? First, even though people may claim that truth and morality doesn't matter, they don't really believe that when someone treats them immorally. For example, they might claim that lying isn't wrong, but just watch how morally outraged they get when you lie to them, especially if it's about their money. Who claims this? Again, they don't understand the actual argument, which is not everyone has the same moral code. The argument is not there is no such thing as morality or that there is no truth in morality. It's that other people don't follow the same morality as you do necessarily. That's all it is. We often hear, it's the economy, stupid. We often hear that it's the economy, stupid. Stupid's capitalized, by the way. But just think about how much better the economy would be if everyone told the truth. There would be no Enrons or Tycos. There would be no scandals or scams. There would be no burdensome government regulations. Of course the economy is important, but it's directly affected by morality. Morality undergirds virtually everything we do. It not only affects us financially, but in certain circumstances, it also affects us socially, psychologically, spiritually, as of yet undefined, and even physically. A second reason truth and morality matters is because success in life is often dependent on the moral choices a person makes. Again, these moral choices, these are dependent on the person. That's what we're saying. These include choices regarding sex, marriage, children, drugs, money, business dealings, and so on. Right, like some people don't want to have children, so you cannot tell them that it's their moral imperative to reproduce. Some choices bring prosperity, others result in ruin. Third, as we pointed out in a previous book, Legislating Morality, all laws legislate morality. The only question is whose morality will be legislated. Think about it. Every law declares one behavior right and the opposite wrong. That's morality. Whose morality should be legislated on ideas such as abortion or euthanasia? These are issues that directly impact the lives and health of real people. If it's morally wrong to kill innocent people, shouldn't that truth be legislated? Likewise, whose morality should be legislated on the other issues of public policy that may affect your life, health, or finances? The answers we legislate can dramatically affect every citizen's life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Well, again, these are not easy issues to talk about, and just to sit here and say, oh, well, there is a right way because I interpreted the Bible this way, therefore we're going to do it this way. I mean, abortion and euthanasia, God's a big fan of both of those. Have you read your Bible? So this idea that, well, these are things that are against this and that God's against killing, is he really? Is he really against killing? So I don't know where they get these ideas. They're not from the Bible. So how do we figure these out? Knowing that people don't necessarily believe what we believe, how do we sit here and say this type of thing should be, well, we don't want to use the word should, right? This type of thing allows for the most expression of freedom. This type of thing allows for the most expression of subjective happiness. Where are we going with this, right? This is what we have to consider. We don't want to consider, well, I personally believe that there's only one way to look at the situation because of my particular interpretation of a religious book. Therefore, that's the interpretation we should go with. These are things that we should open for discussion. I agree these are moral concepts, but whose morality are we using? And why should we use your morality? There's no doubt that what we believe to be true about morality directly impacts lives. Did it matter that the United States Supreme Court, as reflected in the 1857 Dred Scott decision, believed that blacks were not citizens but the property of their slave owners? Did it matter that the Nazis believed Jews were the inferior to the Aryan race? Does it matter today what we think about the moral status of people in other racial or religious categories? Of course, truth and morality matters. What about truth in religion? That truth can impact us even more profoundly than the truth in morality. A fellow naval officer helped me, Frank, realize this back in 1988 when I was a new Christian. Wow, Frank's a fellow veteran? Gross. No, I'm just kidding. I serve with plenty of religious people. I was religious at the time myself. At that time, we were deployed with a U.S. Navy flight crew to a Persian Gulf country. It was near the end of the Iran-Iraq War, and tensions were still high. When you're in a foreign and dangerous place, you tend to ponder your life and your morality more seriously and frequently. One day we were doing just that, talking about God and the afterlife. During our conversation, my friend made a comment that has stuck with me to this day. Referring to the Bible, he said, "I don't believe in the Bible, but if it is true, then I'll be in big trouble." Who says that? Who says that? Of course he was right. If the Bible is true, then my friend has chosen an unpleasant internal destiny. And I don't add that emphasis myself. It's italicized that he chose that destiny. In fact, if the Bible is true, then everyone's eternal destiny can be read from its pages. On the other hand, if the Bible is not true, then many Christians are unwittingly wasting a lot of time, money, and in some cases, even their lives, by preaching Christianity in hostile territories. Either way, truth in religion matters. It also matters if some other religion is true. I don't even care about the religions right now. I just care about the concept of God. Once you get us to God, then we can start talking about different religious beliefs. It also matters if some other religion is true. For example, if the Quran is true, then I'm in as much eternal trouble as my non-Christian Navy friend. On the other hand, if atheists are right, then we might as well lie, cheat, and steal to get what we want because life is all there is and there are no consequences in eternity. What? See, again, it's this idea that atheists don't have anybody that they are responsible to, that they have no personal moral code or anything like that. This is telling us what Frank believes, that if he was atheist, if he didn't have hell looming over his head, then he'll just kill and steal and do whatever the hell he wants because who cares? Who lives like that? Who lives like that? I've never met an atheist like that. I've only met Christians who say this. But forget eternity for 1 minute. Yes, let's get closer to God. How about that? Consider the temporal implications of religious teaching around the world. In Saudi Arabia, some school children are being taught that Jews are pigs and that non-Muslims, infidels, should be killed. While thankfully a majority of Muslims do not believe that non-Muslims should be killed, militant Muslims teach that type of jihad straight from the Quran. Is it really true that there's a God up there by the name of Allah who wants Muslims to kill all non-Muslims, which probably includes you? Does this religious truth matter? It does when those kids grow up to fly planes into buildings and blow themselves up in populated areas. Wouldn't it be better to teach them religious truth that God wants them to love their neighbor? Or what about the secular truth that they're not better than anybody else, so we should all treat each other with basic human respect? How about that? The Saudis may be teaching that Jews are pigs, but in our country, by means of a one-sided biology curriculum, we teach kids that there's really no difference between any human being and a pig. After all, if we're merely the product of a blind, naturalistic forces, if no deity created us with any special significance, then are we nothing more than pigs with big brains? Does this religious, quote, atheistic truth matter? It does when kids carry out its implications. Instead of good citizens who see people made in the image of God, we are producing criminals who see no meaning or value in human life. Ideas have consequences. Now, I do want to point out there is no reference, there's no in-text citation to that, right? Especially because most of the people in our prisons are religious, okay? How they become religious, well, that's can be during their time in jail, but it's before they go to prison. The amount of atheists in prison are a small amount. I mean, really? They really... I gotta take a break. It is no coincidence that the example I came up with for secular morality is just to treat people with basic dignity and respect. That is not pulled out of nowhere, because I knew this was coming. Again, I've been this type of Christian. I've read this type of stuff. I've listened to this type of speech. Do you see what they're saying? They're saying that if you follow this idea that we evolved, then you're going to be a criminal because you don't value life. How does that follow? How does that follow at all? Wouldn't it follow more that maybe we treat other types of life with respect because we aren't any better than pigs? Wouldn't that be more likely? Why then are they saying, oh, we're just going to act like criminals? That doesn't make any sense. But this is what they really think. And we saw this in the foreword as well from another author that was added in there, that these are people who genuinely believe that we're just trash. We're disgusting liars, and they don't have any desire to actually have a good communication with us, ever. Which atheist is going around producing criminals who see no meaning or value in human life? Which atheist is espousing this? Which famous atheist is espousing this? On the positive side, Mother Teresa helped improve conditions in India by challenging the religious beliefs of many in Hindu culture. The Hindu belief of karma and reincarnation leads many Hindus to ignore the cries of the suffering. Well, Mother Teresa loved the suffering because she felt closer to God. Of course, when she got sick, well, yeah, she wanted medication and stuff. She didn't want to suffer herself to be closer to Jesus, but she believed that this suffering of the other people, oh, that was really good. Why? Because they believe that those who suffer deserve their plight for doing something wrong in a previous life. So if you are helping suffering people, you are interfering with their karma. Mother Teresa taught Hindus in India the Christian principles of caring for the poor and the suffering. Read like anything critical of Mother Teresa. Does that religious idea matter? Ask the millions of lives she touched. Does the religious teaching of karma matter? Ask the millions still suffering. What about the atheist idea of treating people with basic human respect because none of us are better than the other? How about that? The bottom line is this: regardless of what the real truth is concerning religion and morality, our lives are greatly affected by it today, and perhaps even in eternity. Those who cavalierly say, so what? Who cares about truth, immorality, and religion? Are ignoring reality and blindly skating on thin ice. I think the authors are the ones ignoring reality, because nobody says this. We owe it to ourselves and others to find the real truth and then act on it. So let's get started with the question, does God exist? Finally, right? Finally. But instead we get a summary. Number 1, people often get their beliefs from their parents, friends, childhood religion, or culture. Sometimes they simply formulate their beliefs on the basis of their feelings alone. While such beliefs could be true, it's also possible they may not be. The only way to be reasonably certain is to test the beliefs by the evidence, and that is done by utilizing sound philosophical principles, including those found in logic and science. Number 2, logic tells us that opposites cannot be true at the same time in the same sense. Logic is part of reality itself and is thus the same in America, India, and everywhere in the universe. How do we know it's the same everywhere in the universe? Let's just go with it. Okay. Number 3, by use of the Roadrunner tactic, we can see that Hume is not skeptical about skepticism. What do they think skepticism means? To claim you don't know anything? And Kant is not agnostic about agnosticism. Therefore, their views defeat themselves. It is possible to know truths about God. Okay, that was thrown in there. Number 4, many truths about God can be known by his effects, which we can observe. Through many observations, inductions, we can draw reasonable conclusions, deductions about the existence and nature of God, which we will do in subsequent chapters. You'd better, because you didn't. Point 5, truth and morality in religion has temporal and maybe even eternal consequences. Apathy and ignorance can be fatal. What you don't know or don't care to know can hurt you. Point 6, so why should anyone believe anything at all? Because they have evidence to support those beliefs, and because beliefs have consequences. All right. So we've been through all the introduction stuff, chapter 1 and chapter 2, and we haven't gotten any closer to this idea about atheists having faith, about God not requiring so much faith as not believing in God, or anything along those lines. We've seen plenty of times that the authors are either making things up or at least sound like they're making things up because they're being proposed vaguely, they're being proposed very conveniently, and they're being proposed with absolutely no way to verify whether it actually happened. Meanwhile, they're providing in-text citations only for stuff they already agree with and don't need to cite anyway. That's really, really surprising. It reminds me of, there was a predator that was caught on To Catch a Predator. And one of the things he said, to prove his innocence, he said, well, my car's right outside, I can show it to you, I can prove it. We don't care about that. We don't care about your car being outside. And in fact, Chris Hansen said something like, well, I believe you. Like, why wouldn't I believe you? I'm absolutely not saying that the authors have anything in common with that predator. I'm not saying that. It's just I was reminded of that because who cares if your car's outside and you can prove it? Nobody's asking about that. We're all asking about why did you have this horrible conversation with somebody that you believe to be a minor and then show up to enact any of those activities that you mentioned in the chat log. That's what we care about. In the same way, I don't care how C.S. Lewis and other religious people like Ravi Zacharias, I don't care that they believe the same thing you do. You don't have to prove it by quoting their books, including one book that you cited and it doesn't actually say what you said. I don't need that. I need the sources of the stuff that you claim that I'm saying as an atheist, that you claim that other people are saying that need to be addressed, like saying most Americans or many Americans believe something that I've never heard. That is, I mean, you would just expect that. Both of these guys, or at least one of them, claims to have a PhD. You'd think they'd be better at writing and supporting their facts or they're supporting their arguments. And yet here we are. We're all the way into starting chapter 3 next time, and we're not any closer to the basic start of the book. What's interesting, and I'll say it again, it's that these authors seem to occasionally include stuff that atheists actually do say and they do care about, but it's so overwhelmingly covered up by just a bunch of nonsense that nobody's saying, arguments that nobody's making, and then they're filling up the book with arguments against those arguments that nobody's making. And I'm really just left with for what purpose? I don't even see how a Christian benefits from this. I really don't. They didn't have a page limit, did they? I can't imagine they did. They can publish a book of any length, right? So for what purpose did they include all of this? This isn't any more convincing for a Christian. And this isn't any more convincing for a Muslim that might be reading this, or an atheist that might be reading this, or anybody else. So I don't see why they're including it as if to educate us, or to get us on board with thinking how they think, when these are things that most of us agree with. In fact, I don't even know anybody who doesn't agree with it, and I'm just saying most of us because I can't assume that all people do. I'm sure there's one person out there that disagrees with something that they're saying, but who says that? Who says we shouldn't care about truth? Who says that? Who says we should be ignorant and apathetic? Who says that? So who were they arguing for? This is what, one, two, three pages dedicated to a counter argument of an argument that nobody makes. And again, for what purpose? I don't know. I don't know what they were thinking. I don't know if they were editing this themselves, but whoever had to read over this again, certainly somebody would have caught this and said, hey, do we really need this in the book? I don't know. Hopefully chapter 3 will be better. At least this wasn't as bad as chapter 1. Chapter 1 was pretty rough, but then again, it's on like day 5 of a migraine, so I don't know. Maybe that colored it a bit, but this is bizarre. And again, this idea that my friend has chosen an unpleasant eternal destiny. Why? How did they choose it? If they don't know whether the Bible's right, then they're not making an informed decision, so it's not a choice. It's bizarre. Bizarre. I don't know. Just bizarre. So if you guys have anything that you want to add to this, please do, because your comments are far, far more engaging and interesting than anything I've read thus far. If you have any other desire to see the previous videos, though there are some links in the details section below. There are also links on different ways to contact me, such as on Discord, Twitter, Instagram, and so on. And also a link to Patreon, where you can support me getting caffeine and migraine medication so I can deal with this stuff for as little as $1 a month. Checking out the videos, you get a preview of the videos. There are posts and pictures that I post that are only for people on Patreon. And then we also do a group live stream that's for patrons only once a month. So if you guys want to join us there, I appreciate all the donations. I really, really do. Every little bit counts. That being said, have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, thanks for listening.